why the U.S. Patent Library is the modern-day equivalent of the Library of Alexandria. I've been thinking a lot about this lately, since humanity seems hell-bent on going through another dark age. The end of the Dark Ages in Europe and the West began when Thomas Aquinas rediscovered the works of Aristotle, which were left over from the Library of Alexandria. It is said that the Library of Alexandria was the biggest collection of knowledge in the ancient world. It was founded by Ptolemy in 295 BCE. Ptolemy envisioned Alexandria as a leading center for learning and culture, and the library was a key part of that vision. The library was not just a repository for scrolls, but a major research institution that attracted scholars from all across the ancient world, including Euclid and Aristophanes. The loss of the library is considered one of the greatest losses of human knowledge that ever happened in history. The Library of Alexandria was not wiped out in one fell swoop. The first blow to the library happened when Julius Caesar firebombed Alexandria in 48 BCE, which caused part of the Library of Alexandria to burn down. From there was a gradual decline in the library. The final blow was by the Catholic bishop Theophilus in 391 CE. He and his followers deliberately destroyed what was left of the Library of Alexandria. While there appears to be some debate about this, it is consistent with the anti-reason, anti-intellectual ideas of the early Christian religion. The Renaissance, in many ways, was a rediscovery of the works that were contained in the Library of Alexandria, including the works of Aristotle. Since the world seems hell-bent on going through another dark age, the question is, what collection of knowledge do we want to make sure survives to get us through to the second Renaissance? I'm sure many people would think the Library of Congress, because a copy of everything that was published and copyrighted in the U.S. is kept in the Library of Congress. Other people might say academic journals, because that is the biggest repository of academic research. But in fact, that information is incomplete. It's only what's interesting to academics. For me, the main criteria would be what group of information or library of information would provide the practical know-how about how to rebuild our civilization. There have been many books that attempted to fill this role, such as the How Things Work book set. But the greatest source of practical information on the technology that was created from the Industrial Revolution onward is the U.S. Patent Library. It is not widely understood, but patents are required to disclose how to build or practice the invention. So unlike academic journals, which often just give you a bunch of data, this tells you how to actually build something that you can use. Because it shows the evolution of designs, it is much more illuminating than any other source of practical information. For instance, it shows the evolution of the design of steam engines. Understanding the evolution of designs is the key to creating your own design or inventing something new. This is much more important than mathematics, which is mainly useful for analysis and optimization. In fact, inventors are discouraged from putting math inside their patents. These are practical descriptions on how to build or practice something. For this reason, I'm convinced that the U.S. Patent Library is the single greatest source of information on how to rebuild our society from a technological point of view. Engineering schools have become obsessed with mathematics. As a former engineering student, I'm well aware of this issue. I once asked an engineering friend of mine who was teaching at a local university why engineering schools were so obsessed with math when this isn't necessary or helpful in design or invention. He told me it was because it's easier to test math questions than to actually ask test questions about design. This has been a great disservice to a whole generation of engineers, including myself. Every engineer should learn how to read a patent. One example I have from my own personal experience is an engineer who worked in the defense industry, was working on a secret project that spent millions of dollars on a research project. When they finally did a search of the patent literature, they found out that someone had already done all the work that they'd done, and they'd come up with similar designs. According to this engineer, that patent search could have saved his company $10 million. Another example of how learning to read patents can help you is illustrated by this example. I was interested in how El Salvador was going to use geothermal energy to mine Bitcoin. I do not have a background in geothermal energy production, but in a few short days of doing research on U.S. patents, I knew the history of geothermal energy production. I found out that geothermal energy is not necessarily environmentally friendly. I found the evolution of the geothermal energy designs over the years, and I learned the key design constraints. I found out who the major players are in the geothermal energy area. I also found out the engineers and inventors are the main people developing these new technologies. Marketing companies would charge you thousands upon thousands of dollars for this information that you can find yourself if you just learn how to read patents. A big mistake when reading patents is reading them like they're prose. In this next section, I'm going to teach you how to read a patent so you can access the treasure trove of information contained therein. You should know that there is no standard outline for what a patent should look like, but because of idiot judges who never invented anything and don't understand the engineering and invention process, there's a lot of legalese garbage that's required to satisfy these idiots. The only major requirements in a patent are the claims, which define what the invention is, a drawing, and a description of the invention so that someone else can build or practice the invention. That is, that they can make and use the invention. This last part is the ideological trade involved in a patent. Instead of keeping your invention a trade secret, you tell the public how to practice or how to build your invention, and in return you get a property right. Yes, it's a limited term property right. One of the insane arguments against patents is that because their term is limited, they're not property rights. All property rights have limited terms. Dead people do not have property rights. With that background, I'll describe the most important sections and what they mean in a modern patent. If you look at older patents, you will not find these exact sections. And in fact, these sections are not necessarily the same in every patent. The first part of the patent, of course, is the title. Unfortunately, the title, which probably used to be a technical title, has become a legal title. Again, this is because of idiot judges who have incorporated the title into the claims. So patent attorneys had to adjust and made the title a legal title, broad and almost useless to technical people. The next section you're likely to run into is the abstract. Again, because of idiot judges, it's likely that this will not be a technical abstract, but will be a legal type abstract, which will provide you very limited information. The next section might be the claims. The claims are the legal definition of the invention. Because of this, they are highly legalese. They are not helpful in understanding the technical aspects of the invention. Claims are an epistemological marvel in the art of definition when they're interpreted correctly. And there's very specific rules how the words in a claims are to be interpreted. And this results in very exact definitions when applied correctly. But they are almost useless to technical people if you're just trying to understand what the invention is or how to build it. The next section you might run into is the drawings. The drawings in a patent are not mechanical drawings. They're meant to be conceptual drawings, so they help you understand how to build or practice invention, not the exact dimensions or specifications, like mechanical or production drawings. The next section you're likely to run into is the background of the invention. A subsection of this is the field of the invention. This will be a very broad statement about the area of technology that the invention is related to. The next section is often entitled The Description of Related Art. This is where you will probably find a good history of the technology involved. You will also commonly find the explanation of why they think their invention is different or better than what has come before. So this can be very helpful in understanding the technical details related to the invention. Note, patents are written for someone familiar with the technology. As a result, they will not explain how well-known components work. The next section is the summary of the invention. This is just a paraphrasing of the claims. The reason for this is because idiot judges who incorporated limitations from the summary into the claims. This is the way to make sure that this doesn't happen, so it's highly legalese, and it's not very helpful for technical people. The next section is the brief description of the drawings. This is like a small title that you would put under the drawings to give you an understanding of what the drawing is. It's not highly helpful in understanding the invention. Then we get to the detailed description of the invention. This is the meat and potatoes of the invention from a technical point of view. This section describes how the invention is created or how it works. It usually has reference numerals that relate back to components in the drawings. It is meant to be a how-to description, not a technical description that you might get in an academic journal. The goal is not to give you academic data. The goal is to give an understanding of how to build or practice invention. Given this, probably the most important sections to read if you're a technical person trying to uncover the technological gold nuggets contained therein are the description of the related art or background and the detailed description. Many people try to read the claims and make interpretations based on the claims. Unless you're trained in or understand the construction of how claims are written, you're almost certainly going to get this wrong. You can see this over and over in how people make outrageous assertions about what a patent covers. This is all based on their ignorance of how claims are written. Claims cannot be read like prose. Anyway, with those warnings, now you have a basic idea of how to read a patent. Couple of myths before I end this video. The present patent system has become a crony capitalist tool for major corporations to bludgeon startups and to prevent them from obtaining patents in areas that they care about. You can still obtain patents in areas that don't matter to big corporations. For instance, you might be able to get a patent that's worth something that's related to fishing or related to biking or other small areas. With that caveat, you should understand that a correct or proper patent system is not a monopoly. It is an implementation of natural rights. It follows directly from John Locke's idea of property. That is, if you create something, by definition create something of value, then you obtain property rights in it. Another myth about patents is that they limit information. There's absolutely no empirical evidence of this. In fact, the definition of a patent is to lay open, that is, to publish, so that the public can get information about the invention. Patents actually cause greater dispersion of useful information. Before there were patents, people kept their inventions as trade secrets, which did limit information, because that was the only way they could profit from having spent the time and effort to discover a new invention. Another idiotic criticism of patents is that they limit the dispersion of technology. There's absolutely no evidence for this. The countries with the strongest patent systems are the countries that have had the greatest dispersions of technology. There's an obvious reason for this, because if you don't have property rights in your invention, then it's very hard to get funding to create it and funding to market it. Therefore, it is in fact the absence of patents, property rights for inventions, that creates a lack of dispersion of technology, which all the empirical evidence shows. Another idiotic complaint about a proper patent system is that they are term limited and therefore not a real property right. Well, dead people don't have property rights, so all property rights have a limited term. So that is not a valid criticism. The U.S. Patent Library is the greatest source of practical how-to information to rebuild society if, as it appears to be the case, we are headed for another dark age. Long live freedom, damn it.